This man's name is Anatoly Kuznetsov. He is 40 years old, one of the Soviet Union's leading novelists. On July 30th of this year, Anatoly Kuznetsov, on a trip to England, escaped from his Russian guard and defected. In the lining of his coat, he had sewn this film, copies of the original manuscripts of his novels.
That there is the whole of my life. These are my real books, not the ones as they are known to the reader.
You know, Anatoly, at the very beginning, a great many people outside the Soviet Union had great hopes for communism. What went wrong?
Communist doctrine, communist teaching is very attractive. And it grew out of good convictions and beliefs. But life, it appears, is a good deal more complex than it appeared to the founders of communism. And we see ancient history being repeated again. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Thanks to communism, that road has become many miles longer. I only have to mention the name Stalin, and you're bound to agree with me. If that is possible, if it's possible to have millions of victims completely senselessly, that means that the idea itself is no good.
But how is it that the Russian people, with their great sense of nationality, great sense of being Russian, how on earth were they so easily cowed?
Oh, there is in Russia a long, long tradition of tyranny. See, if you were born in a concentration camp and your parents were born in a concentration camp and your grandparents were born in a concentration camp, you see, you no longer imagine any other life. First of all, the Tsars oppressed Russia, and then came communism. There was a little short period, that intermission in 1917 between February and October. That was so small that you can really write it off.
Well, we in the West have all sorts of problems. Vietnam and other things that are tearing our society apart. Have you ever thought about any of these things?
Yes, of course. I consider that the war continues in Vietnam only because of the Soviet Union. As for America, there's a lot of thinking people in Russia who think the same as I do. But rather less as far as Vietnam is concerned.
As a thinking man in the Soviet Union, did you regard the United States as a threat to peace, as a threat to yourself?
I've been living too short a time in the West and have too little information. I have no knowledge at all of America. I very much want to go there. But now and for a long time, my personal opinion is that the real aggressor in the modern world is the Soviet Union. They don't conceal their aims, they say that communism spread over the whole world. That after all, the Western world, including America, defends itself.
You know, even here in the West, one of the great conflicts at the moment for writers is a writer's commitment, a writer's involvement in politics. Do you feel that even here you must engage yourself?
Oh, God, how I'm tired of all that. I don't want to have anything to do with politics. You put me political questions, but my answers are the answers of a dilettante. I really like writing. Writing literature. So there I got to the point where I felt I couldn't live there anymore. I couldn't do it there. So I'm going to try to do it here. That's all I'm hoping for. That was really just as if in that same concentration camp you just make slightly more human conditions. You're banned from writing letters and receiving parcels, say, and then for a time you are allowed to write letters and allowed to receive parcels. And see, some people took it all seriously and thought that very soon the doors were really going to open. No, the Soviet regime cannot possibly open the doors properly. It seems to me at the moment when I think about it, it's like some nightmare, some frightful dream. Life is like some constant, unbroken theatrical production. Never say out loud what you really think, but what you ought to say. There are, of course, some people who do say what they think. But these are just people, not very bright people, who are just using set phrases of official propaganda. But a thinking man finds it very hard, though. It's a terrible system of universal informing, universal following. You cannot trust a single person there. It's quite possible for a son to inform on his father, or a wife on her husband. Not to mention what friends can do to friends.
What gave you the idea or the sense that it might be any different in the West?
They isolate us all from foreigners, but we read books. And sometimes we're able to travel abroad. In order to know a little bit more about the world, I especially learned Polish. So you can buy Polish newspapers in Moscow. And they tell you more about the world than Russian newspapers do. And then, after all, once I was actually in Paris, 9 years ago. But then I also became a criminal. I got away from my group once in Montmartre and got to know an artist who was painting modern pictures. I asked him whether he was allowed to paint pictures like that. He just laughed. I went home with him. He showed me his pictures, said he'd won some prizes for them. I said, this is just a fantastic life. This is just tremendous happiness. He took me to the window. He lived up in an attic right at the top. He said, look, it's all right here. Why the hell do you want to go back to Russia? Why don't you stay here with me? I'll paint what I like, and you can write what you like. And a glass of milk will be... We'll have enough for a glass of milk.
Why didn't you do it then?
Это очень страшно человеку, который родился, я говорю, и вырос в концлагере. Так, вдруг неожиданно это нужно быть очень решительным.
It's very frightful for a person who's born in a concentration camp. It too is too sudden. I'd left my wife, whom I loved in Russia, my son who was only just born then. I listened to it as if it was like a fairy tale, something fantastic. You see?
Did you brood on that when you got back to Russia?
All thinking people in Russia think about this and brood on it. You see, it's very difficult. We Russians are very fond of our country. Every single emigrant is really suffering from a sort of nostalgia. And then, of course, it's especially frightful for a writer to cut himself off from his people.
Anatoly Kuznetsov, when did you decide to leave the Soviet Union?
Анатолий Кузнецов, вы когда решились уехать из Советского Союза?
Решение уехать было у меня.
The decision to leave I took on the morning of the 21st of August last year.
That was when Soviet troops went into Czechoslovakia. But there have been many things in the past 20 years and more equally horrible. What was so special about Czechoslovakia?
Ну, это, вероятно, для меня лично было последней каплей в чаше.
Well, probably for me personally, that was the last drop.
После этого у меня как-то не осталось веры и надежды.
After that, I really didn't have any faith left or any hope.
All right, there you are, a Soviet citizen who decides to leave Russia. What do you do?
Это очень трудно выехать из Советского Союза.
Because it's very difficult to leave the Soviet Union.
Очень мало людей.
Very few people get to travel outside the Soviet Union.
Прежде всего, если на вас есть в полиции досье.
First of all, if there is a dossier on you with the police, well, then you won't get out anyway.
Вы должны быть очень на работе, хорошую репутацию.
You've got to have a very good reputation at work.
Должны много-много раз заявить.
You've got to have made frequent statements about your political loyalty, your love for the party and the government.
Вы должны быть психически и нервно.
You must be psychologically and nervously in good form, fit.
Если вы обращались к врачу, особенно к психиатру, автоматически вы больше никогда не...
If you've consulted a doctor, and especially if you've consulted a psychiatrist, you would never be let out. And then for 5 or 6 months you fill in a mess of different forms. You particularly have to put down what people near to you, close to you, you leave behind in Russia. A bachelor has very little hope of getting out. A man with a family has better chances. Then he has children left behind and people related to him. Then you have to go through all sorts of conversations, interviews with people. Sometimes they will tell you to follow the activities of the people who go with you, because they very seldom let you out alone. You have to go out in a group. On my case, they attached a special personal agent to me. I had no permission to leave. I once made a journey in 1961 to France. And since then, for 8 years, they wouldn't let me out. There were foreign publishing houses invited me out. I was invited to Paris by a French publishing firm at their expense, for their money. And it looked as though they were going to let me out. But then the secret police got in the way and I wasn't released. Then I was invited to New York by the Dial Press publishers. They wrote a long letter. They promised to put up $5,000. And then once again, at the very last moment, they wouldn't let me out. So then I decided to get out at any price. I got ready to try and swim out underwater. Because it's very difficult, this tremendous guard on the frontier everywhere. I took a lot of chances and I was very scared. I trained myself to do this. I trained myself to swim underwater. I can now, for example, swim for 15 hours underwater. Because what I had to do was swim under the water and do it in one night. And only if there were bad weather. I just got a letter from another Russian who actually did manage to do it by swimming. He got out to Turkey in the end. There he met up with a Soviet frontier guard who had also got out to Turkey. And the frontier guard explained to him it was only a miracle that he had got out at all. Lots of people try, but they all get caught. The Russian authorities don't only have radar equipment on the surface, which are good enough even to detect a child's ball floating on the surface. But they also have hydro radar locators underneath the water. And they would have caught me. They would have detected me.
Now, in coming out, you didn't really come out alone. You came out with everything you'd ever written. How did you achieve this?
I'm a bit of an amateur photographer, and I took pictures. All my manuscripts, I put them onto film. I'll show you some of them. I've got them here. That's roughly, that's the sort of thing, just ordinary film. I managed to get 6 sheets, typing sheets, onto each exposure. You see, if you brought it all out as actual manuscript, well, it would make something like 5 or 6 cases, 5 or 6. So I squeezed it, wound it up really tight, and it didn't take up much more room than that cigarette pack. I hid it inside my jacket. And that really were the whole of my possessions, the whole of my property with which I came out of Russia. And that there is the whole of my life. These are my real books, not the ones as they are known to the reader.
So you decided against swimming out, and you made one more attempt to come out legally.
Сделал последнюю, третью попытку,
I made my third effort to get out legally,
чтобы понравиться.
so that I decided to try to fit in with what the secret police wanted.
Если бы и на этот раз меня не пустили, то это уже значит...
I knew that if I didn't let me out that time, then I knew I would never get out.
Мне это удалось, дорогой.
Well, I succeeded, but at a very considerable price.
What was that price?
Я говорил, что я должен...
As I said, I had to demonstrate in some way my loyalty. Not only my loyalty, but my anxiety, my willingness to work with the secret police.
8 лет они меня преследовали.
They persecuted me for 8 years.
Требовали, чтобы я доносил о своих друзьях-писателях.
They demanded that I should inform upon my friends who were writers. Yevtushenko, Aksionov.
Вот такой вот, это все мои друзья.
These are all my friends.
Я отказывался.
I refused.
Тогда на меня завели огромное досье.
So then they developed a great dossier on me.
Подсылали ко мне.
They got people to attach themselves to me,
Под видом друзей.
pretending to be friends.
Ставили женщинам задачу сделаться моими любовью.
They got women to try to become my mistresses.
Многие из них рассказали мне об этом и предупредили.
A lot of these people told me what was happening and warned me about it.
Телефон мой прослушивали, письма распечатывали.
My telephone was bugged, my letters were opened.
Дома, я думаю, что у меня был микрофон.
I think there were microphones in my rooms.
Решительно все.
They knew absolutely everything about me.
Было у меня 2 журнала «Америка».
I had 2 copies of the magazine America.
Вдруг мне позвонил какой-то незнакомый человек, сказал, зачем вы держите эти журналы у себя дома?
And suddenly some completely unknown person rang me up and said, why on earth do you keep those foreign magazines in your home?
Это уже записано в вашем досье.
It's already written down in your dossier.
И я тогда...
So then, in desperation, I decided to show them that I had changed my ways, that I would would behave differently.
Я сказал себе, нужно вообразить, что это гестапо.
What you have to do, I said to myself, is to just pretend to yourself, believe that this is the Gestapo.
Я должен бежать из концлагеря.
I must escape from the concentration camp.
Что им нужно?
What do they want?
Чтобы мне поверить.
In order that they should believe me.
Доносить на своих друзей.
That I should inform on my own friends.
Прекрасно. Вам будет донос.
That would be fine. Let them have their informer.
Я сочинил великолепно.
I composed what was probably the most striking, the finest piece of writing in my life.
Я сказал, что Евтушенко и Аксенов и
I said that these writers, Yevtushenko, Aksionov, and a group of others, right down to some actors in the comedy theater, were getting ready to produce and publish a frightful underground magazine.
Что у них есть подпольные типографии, они собирают деньги, рукописи.
That they've got an underground print shop, that they're gathering manuscripts together and money for the job.
О, как тайная полиция обрадовалась.
Oh, how the secret police were pleased with this.
Это чистая беллетристика. Я хотел дописать, что они хотят взорвать Кремль, но подумал, что у них хватит юмора.
This was a pure fiction. I even thought I might put in that they were actually planning to blow up the Kremlin, but then I thought that they'd see through that.
Впрочем, я напрасно. У них нет.
But it didn't matter. They have no sense of humor. They took it all seriously.
Then what did you do?
Да, я решил убедительное заявление написать. У нас сейчас там в России идет...
I decided to write a really persuasive application. There's a terrific campaign now going on at the moment, preparing for the 100th anniversary of Lenin's birth. If you want to do something in this connection, then everything is possible.
роман о Ленине, как он в Лондоне создал партию.
I said I wanted to write a novel about Lenin and how he created the Communist Party in
Мне
London.
нужно побывать во всех этих местах в Лондоне.
And I would just have to go and visit all the places where he'd been in London.
So you created a kind of phony project in a way.
Создал очень
And I made it it was a very detailed plan too.
И тогда, значит,
So then they started to work with me and said that they'd let me go to England.
и что мне даже, возможно, дадут какое-то тайное задание.
And that maybe they would give me some secret task to perform, secret mission.
Перед самым отъездом я должен позвонить и, вероятно, получить это задание.
That just before I left Russia, I should telephone and I would probably get my secret instructions.
Знаете, я рискнул и не позвонил.
Do you know, I took a chance and I didn't bother to ring up.
Anatoly, do you feel any guilt about what you wrote and reported about Yevtushenko and the others?
Конечно.
Of course I do.
Не исключено, что они не исключено.
It's by no means excluded that they may have had difficulties.
Я здесь сразу же опубликовал в Daily Telegraph.
I wrote about it immediately as soon as I was here in the Daily Telegraph.
Чтобы советское КГБ знало,
So that the KGB over there should know what I'd done.
That it was a false project?
Yes, of course.
ну, это такой рядовой факт у них. Это никого не удивляет.
But this is such an ordinary, everyday thing with them that this isn't going to surprise anybody.
Yet you know that Yevtushenko was once greatly admired in the West, and many of his poems were against the Soviet system. So perhaps there was some grains of truth in what you reported to the KGB.
Нет, он не собирается устраивать поздних фотографий.
No, of course not. He has no plans to start an underground print shop.
So there you are on a plane with your shadow, and you arrive in London. Then what do you do?
Поселяемся в гостинице,
Well, we found a room in a hotel,
которую нам приготовили уже.
which was booked for us
Либо русское посольство, либо
either by the Soviet embassy
близкие к нему.
or people who were very close to the embassy.
Я не могу выбрать гостиницу.
I don't have the right to choose a hotel myself.
And then you have a plan.
У нас непременно всегда есть очень точный, написанный на многих листах бумаги план.
We always, when we come on these trips, have several sheets of paper containing the program of what we are to do, and a copy of this remains behind in Russia.
What I meant was a plan to evade the authorities.
Но это уже другое дело.
Well, that's a different question, of course.
Tell me about that.
У меня лично был план прежде всего получить несколько часов времени, когда мой агент...
Well, my first problem was to get a few hours of freedom when my agent, my watchdog, wasn't with me.
Этого мне не удавалось 4 дня.
I didn't manage to get that for 4 days.
Он не спускал с меня глаз.
He never took his eyes off me.
You must have been a desperate man.
Нет, я знал.
No. I studied him pretty carefully. I knew his weaknesses.
What were they?
Вернее так, мы с ним гуляли по Лондону.
We went walking around London,
Ну, как всякий
and
молодой
he, like
человек,
any young man,
просто
he was simply amazed at the beautiful women, the pretty girls, the short skirts, the mini skirts.
Вот я увидел это и сагитировал его пойти в стриптиз.
I noticed the effect this had on him, and I worked on him with a view to suggested he should visit the striptease shows.
Он даже там сам.
You had to become a member, and he wrote himself in as a Yugoslav citizen.
Нам в России строго запрещают.
In Russia, we are strictly forbidden to visit anything like striptease, or get mixed up with women.
Мы даем.
We have to sign a paper saying that we shan't do this.
Таким образом, оба мы.
In this way, both of us, both I and my watchdog, became criminals.
А это между нами.
So this introduced a certain amount of confidence between the two of us.
Мы договорились
We
друг другу
agreed
не
with each
выдавать.
other not to tell on each other.
И когда он сказал, что ему вечером непременно нужно
And when he
встретиться,
told me that in the evening he absolutely had to meet certain people,
а я должен сидеть дома,
that I should have to sit in the
сказал,
hotel,
я лучше пойду в другой стриптиз, посмотрю, как там, если там интересно, то мы туда снова пойдем.
then I said, much better if I were to go and have a look at another striptease, and if it looks all right, then we can both go along there another time.
Он поколебался и согласился.
He hesitated for a moment, and then he agreed. And I said if I don't come back for rather a long time, he shouldn't worry.
И ушел. Ушел я в телефонный автомат.
And he went off, and, well, I went off to a telephone kiosk, telephone booth.
Я звонил в Daily Telegraph.
I telephoned the Daily Telegraph,
Искал Дэвида Флойда, который говорит.
tried to get in touch with David Floyd, who speaks Russian.
Не удалось найти.
I managed to get hold of him, and we met.
What did you say to him?
Я сказал Дэвиду Флойду, что я хочу остаться в Лондоне, чтобы он помог мне, потому что я не знаю языка.
I told him I wanted to stay in London, asked him to help me because I didn't know English,
Спрятаться от моего агента.
that I wanted to hide away from my watchdog, my KGB man.
Это очень опасный шаг.
This was a very dangerous step to take.
Их агенты везде по всему миру.
They've got their agents all over the place, all over the world.
Сами мне еще в России с довольным смехом рассказывали, что у них агенты таких невероятных.
They used to tell me with a smile that they had agents in all parts of the world, in the most incredible places,
В таких невероятных местах, что и вообразить
places you
невозможно.
just couldn't imagine.
Допустим, я так могу предположить, допустим, я обращусь в полицию, а начальник этой полиции советский агент.
They suggested that I might perhaps go to a police chief, and this police chief might in fact be a Soviet agent. This was just theoretically.
Человека, в котором я могу быть
So I
уверен.
looked for somebody of whom I could be quite certain.
Он сразу понял, в чем дело, и очень хорошо мне помог.
He quickly understood what was the matter, and he helped me, and I shall be grateful to him for the rest of my life.
You know that some Western writers, the American novelist William Styron, have described what you have done as despicable, both in informing and, in fact, in leaving the Soviet Union.
Если мистер Стайрон так считает,
If Mr. Styron thinks that way, well, I'm happy to offer him my flat in Tula. Let him go and try it.
они до сих пор не понимают, что такое Советский Союз.
They still don't understand just what the Soviet Union is.
Если бы перед Томасом Манном или Бертольдом Брехтом стояла дилемма либо остаться у Гитлера, либо эмигрировать, что бы тогда сказал Сталин?
If Thomas Mann or Bertolt Brecht had been faced with the dilemma of leaving Germany or living under Hitler, what would they have said then?
Они ведь уехали из Германии.
But they left Germany, after all.
А если бы им пришлось просто спасаться
If they,
любой ценой перед гестапо,
if they had had to save themselves at any price to get away from the Gestapo.
впрочем, этот вопрос я и сам решить не могу.
In any case, this is a question which I myself can't decide.
Я хочу сам себя спрашиваю, что сказали бы люди, если бы узнали, что Достоевский, например, написал, ну пусть ложный, но донос на своих приятелей.
I ask myself, after all, what would people say if they learned, say that, well, Dostoevsky, say, had written, had informed, even falsely, but had informed on his friends.
Я не знаю, что тут отвечать. Знаю только одно, что ни Достоевский, ни Толстой, ни другие великие русские писатели не жили в России, в советской.
I don't know what to answer. I can only say that neither Dostoevsky, nor Tolstoy, nor Turgenev, none of them lived in Soviet Russia.
Yet Daniel, Sinyavsky, and Pasternak did live in the Soviet Union.
Значит, вы предлагаете русскому писателю только потому, что он русский, садиться в концлагерь.
So you would be advising a Russian writer simply because he's Russian to live in a concentration camp?
У меня маленькая надежда, что не сидя в концлагере...
I have a small hope that not living in a concentration camp, I may be able to say more. I don't know.
What were your feelings as a Soviet writer during the trials of Daniel and Sinyavsky?
Ужас.
Horror.
Did you want to speak out for them?
У меня не хватало мужества на это.
I didn't have the courage to do that.
And where would you be today if you had spoken out?
Если бы я это активно делал, я был бы рядом с ними.
If I'd done it really actively, I should be alongside them now.
Или бы просто меня не публиковали, я бы не смог выехать.
Or they would simply not have published me, or I shouldn't have been able to come out of the country.
The Soviet authorities said you left for the most tawdry of reasons, that you left a pregnant mistress behind.
Я об этом узнал из советской печати.
Well, I learned about this from the Soviet press.
Я пока не знаю, в чем дело.
I don't yet know what they're talking about.
Борис Полевой об этом написал, и, видимо, ему больше известно об этой женщине, чем мне.
It was Boris Polyevoy who wrote about this, and apparently he knows more about this woman than I do.
You know, Anatoly, human nature is a very funny thing. No one really likes a turncoat. How do you feel about that?
Что же мне делать, и что я обречен быть всегда конформистом, трусом? Что же мне делать?
So what do I have to do? Am I condemned to remain always a coward, a conformist? What can I do?
Я родился в России, я родился
I
в
was
России.
born in Russia.
Жил там
I was born in Russia. I lived there 40 years, and I know no other life.
И вдруг наступил момент, когда я больше так жить не могу.
And the moment came when I could no longer live that way.
Что вы мне посоветуете делать?
What do you advise me to do?
Самоубийство?
Commit suicide?
Я об этом думал.
I thought about that.
Yet, as a writer in the Soviet Union, you were a member of a very select group of people. What I'm really trying to get at is when you sat around with other writers, thinking men, intellectual people, what on earth did you talk about?
В основном жалуюсь.
Mostly we complain.
Это сплошные.
It's just one long complaint.
Человек написал, скажем, роман, у него его не печатают.
One of them say he's written a novel, and so they won't publish it.
Или же печатают так страшно, что
Or else they publish it in such a frightful form that
там в отчаянии.
he's simply desperate.
Isn't that dangerous, though?
Да, опасно.
Well, just where do you draw the line in these conversations? Can you really ever trust each other?
На 100% никому нельзя доверять.
100% you can't trust anybody.
Нужно вести разговор так.
You have to carry on your conversations like this.
Это плохо, и это плохо, но это ошибка.
You say this is very bad, and this is bad, and this is bad, but these are all mistakes.
Но в целом мы коммунисты.
But altogether, we are communists.
Мы считаем, что только мелкие ошибки делают.
We just think that there are little small mistakes committed in Russia.
Anatoly, I've read everything you've written, and one word keeps coming up in almost every article. The word cynicism. Could you expand on that?
Я сейчас очень счастливый человек.
I am, at this moment, a very fortunate person.
Я впервые в жизни говорю то, что я
I am, for the first time in my life, saying what I really think.
В России люди очень многие думают то же самое, что я.
Many, many people in Russia think exactly the same as I do.
Я отвечаю за свои слова, я знаю.
I'm responsible for my words. I know what I'm saying.
В этом театре, в этом цирке мы должны жить.
Insofar as we have to live in that theater,
Каждый человек имеет набор, так сказать, комплект фраз, которые он говорит в стихах.
Every single person has a sort of collection of phrases which he speaks and says officially, publicly,
Соответственно, и набор поступков.
and a corresponding collection of actions.
Поскольку это все-таки нормальное, человеческому существу очень трудно вести двойную жизнь.
Insofar as to a normal human being, it's extremely difficult to lead such a double life.
What are the rewards for that cynicism?
О, конечно, он получает возможность
Well, of course, he gets the possibility
богаче, чем другие.
of living more richly than others, being better off than others.
Может получать товары, продукты в специальных магазинах.
He can buy commodities in special shops.
Ну, отпускает путешествовать по миру.
He will be allowed to travel abroad.
Его награждают ордена.
He may receive decorations, official state medals,
Вы это понимаете.
state prizes.
Do any of your colleagues place any real value on these awards?
Нет, у нас весьма холодно относится над тем, кого
No, on the whole, we're pretty cool towards the sort of rewards you get.
Мой роман «Бабий Яр» был выдвинут на государственную премию.
My novel Babyi Yar was put forward for a state prize.
То, что раньше называлось
It used to be called Stalin prizes.
Когда об этом напечатали в газетах, многие хорошие люди
But when this was reported in the newspapers, a lot of very decent people began to change their attitude towards me for the worse.
к счастью, мне эту премию нет.
Fortunately for me, I didn't get the prize.
The Soviet authorities were very unhappy with your novel, Babyi Yar. Now, I know that book, and it's a simple account of how the Nazis slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Jews and Ukrainians in the Ukraine. What on earth did they object to in that?
Три претензии было к этой книге.
There were three main objections to the book.
Во-первых, в Советском Союзе очень большой антисемитизм.
But in the first place, there is a great deal of anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union.
А Бабий Яр прежде всего связан с убийством евреев.
And Babyi Yar is primarily concerned with the murder of Jews.
Они предпочитают не говорить об этом.
The Soviet officials prefer not to talk about this.
Затем мой роман был шире. Он рассказывал о первом периоде войны, почему было такое страшное поражение.
Then my novel went rather further than this. It begins with talking about the beginning of the war and inquiring why there was such a terrible defeat at that time.
Дело в том, что многие русские люди, особенно украинцы, ждали Гитлера как избавителя.
So the truth of the matter is that a great many Soviet citizens, and especially Ukrainians, waited for Hitler as a liberator.
Потом оказалось, что он им предлагает такой же террор, как и Сталин.
Then it turned out that the Germans were offering them the same kind of terrorist regime as Stalin.
Народ оказался между двух огней, между молотом и наковальней.
So the people found themselves between two fires, between the hammer and the anvil.
Он предпочел собственный русский террор.
The ordinary citizen preferred his own Russian form of terror.
И третье, к чему цензура цеплялась, это чисто художественное.
And the third objection on the part of the censor was purely literary quality, my literary methods.
Они считают, что они знают лучше, чем я, как мне нужно писать.
They considered that they knew better than I how I should write.
Поэтому там была сделана такая масса купюр, переделок, что роман просто...
Consequently, they did such an enormous number of cuts and changes that the novel, in fact, was turned upside down.
Все мои романы.
And all my novels have been treated in the same way.
Я стою всегда перед дилеммой. Или печатать хоть что-нибудь, или ничего.
So I'm always faced with the dilemma of printing at least something or publishing nothing at all.
Но в конце концов мне стало настолько это противно что-нибудь печатать.
But in the end, it became so objectionable to me what they're going to print.
Что я вот сейчас просто подсказываю.
Well, I simply reject the whole of it.
You've left your homeland, as restricted as it was your home. Do you think you'll be able to find the things that you're searching for in the West, or will you always remain Kuznetsov, the man who left?
Конечно, я делаю совершенно отчаянную попытку сделаться другим человеком.
Of course, I'm making an absolutely desperate effort to turn myself into another person.
Мне неприятно, когда называют меня Кузнецов.
I don't like it when people call me Kuznetsov.
Это скомпрометированная фамилия.
This is a compromised name.
Только будущее покажет, смогу ли я быть настоящим художником.
Only the future will show whether I can be a real artist and writer, and a person.
You call Russia a concentration camp, yet you've left your own family back in that concentration camp. Do you fear for them?
Очень, очень.
Very much indeed.
And do you think the Soviet authorities will make them pay for your crime?
Не сомневаюсь.
I have no doubt about that.
And so you feel some guilt over that, too?
Да. Да.
Well, even here in the West, you're living under strain, under great tension.
Да.
How long can a man go on living like that?